Perfect. Welcome, everyone. This is Alok Modi with Pillars of Wall Street. Welcome to the Soft Skills seminars over the next couple hours here. We're going to first kick it off with a seminar on professional presence. We will then progress into a 1-hour seminar on time management. Okay, many of you have taken technical classes with us in the past, but now we're going to focus on what's extremely important, just not the same, but even I would argue more important than many of the technical classes that you've taken in terms of soft skills. Okay, things that you may not have seen as much in the past, may not have focused on in the past as much, but concepts and topics that are paramount in order to assure success in the long term professionally. So that's really where we're headed here today. Again, beginning here with professional presence and then progressing to time management later on. Okay, so thanks everyone for attending here. Let's begin now. So first of all, you see my email address up here on the screen. I want everyone to please take down my email address, amodi@pillarsofwallstreet.com. Many of you have seen me in prior webinars, but if not, just make sure that you take down my contact information, and should you have any questions after the webinar, feel free to reach out. Okay, we're here for you. Our number one goal is to make sure that each and every one of you, long-term succeeds professionally, has the skills necessary to succeed, both in terms of quantitative as well as the soft skill side. And therefore, if you do have questions going forward, just feel free to reach out to me at any point and happy to help. Again, we're here for you. Want to make sure all of you succeed. That's really important. So again, feel free to reach out to me at any point should you have any questions going forward. Okay, with that, I want everyone to now open up your professional presence deck. Everyone should have from us a professional presence presentation. Okay, the cover of which looks like this, what you see here on my screen. If you can please have that open, that would be great. Okay, this is the presentation we will be going through for the first hour here. Okay, great. Now let's start going through the presentation here step by step. So what exactly are we covering in this session? Well, we're going to be covering professional presence, essentially what you need to do in order to maintain a proper image in the workplace. That's really what we need to understand here during this session. What do we have to do in order to maintain a proper image, right? It's not just, as I mentioned earlier, about the technical skills, about any M&A modeling skills and DCF skills and all of that good stuff, but it's also about the qualitative side of things, the soft skill side of things. Okay, that's arguably just as important as any technical skills that we're also covering with all of you. The way you present yourself, the way you carry yourself, speak, embody proper etiquette with respect to emails, meetings, like going out to dinner with a client. All of these things, they go a long way towards towards really ensuring professional success and towards ensuring a certain image which you want to maintain in the eyes of your colleagues as well as clients. Okay, so with that, let's keep going here. Now, here is a table of contents. Here's the overview of the topics we're going to be covering. Okay, so here's an overview of the topics that we'll be covering here throughout this this presentation. Overview: appearance, communication, email and social media, conducting a meeting, workplace etiquette, table manners, idioms, and jargon. Okay. Now, as we said, the way you present yourself, this is very important. Okay, a lot of this may seem self-explanatory, but nonetheless, we do need to keep in mind all of these points. Okay, for example, at the bottom, right, treat everyone with respect, right? Keep your word, very important. If you say you're going to do something, make sure you do it. Don't come up with excuses. If that means you have to stay an extra half an hour at night, then you stay an extra half an hour at night, right? If you say you're going to finish a project by 10 p.m., make sure you do everything in your power to finish it by 10 p.m., for example. Okay, make sure that you're loyal, right? Of course, don't blame others for your mistakes. You're working with other analysts. We see this all the time. Working with other interns on a project, right? Make sure that you own up to any issues, any mistakes that are yours. Right? Don't blame them on someone else. Well, this person put this part of the project together and therefore it's wrong. Right? At the end of the day, it's your job to make sure that everything you're working on is perfect before you hand it off. Right? Even if you didn't necessarily do 100% of it. Okay, so just things like that you have to make sure. You don't want to make yourself look good at the expense of someone else is really the bottom line, right? Don't use other people's faults and mistakes to make yourself look good. It's something to just keep in mind. The other thing is, make sure that you exceed expectations. At least try as best as possible, right? Always strive to exceed expectations. Understand what your responsibilities are and go above and beyond. Okay, and of course that may seem self-explanatory, right? Goes without saying, but you do always, especially in this job, I would argue, unlike a lot of jobs, especially in the financial industry, just given the fact that almost everyone you're working with is a high achiever, you always want to strive to exceed expectations, right? So understand what your role is, what your responsibility is, and then not only execute on that, but try to go above and beyond to the extent possible. Now, the reason that professional presence here is important in the workplace is because you want others to see you as trustworthy, competent, and authentic, right? The bottom line is you want others to be able to trust you with important work and decisions, right? And over time, you'll get more and more responsibility and more important work and decision-making power as people see you as trustworthy and competent. So that's why what we're covering in this session is really important, right? Your technical skills, that's all great. And of course, that's super important at the junior level, but it's these soft skills which also set you apart from someone that's only good with the numbers, right? So being good with the numbers, having attention to detail, all of that's fantastic. And of course, that's super helpful and necessary, but that's only gonna get you so far is the bottom line, right? You wanna make sure that you embody all of these soft skills we're covering with you as well in these sessions, okay? And therefore, having all these soft skills, in the long run, it's all gonna help you succeed professionally, right? It's gonna help you, ensure good performance, help you, project the right corporate image, improve client relationships, right? Any clients that you have over time as you become more senior, you'll have your own client base, all of that. Even I would argue from a company morale point of view, having in place consistent policies, consistent standards, all of that ensures justice and fairness across the workplace, right? Really important. Now, first impressions count. What does this mean? By definition, you do not get a second chance to make a first impression, right? It might seem obvious, but it's something you really want to keep in mind. But the thing is, first impressions can be near impossible to reverse, right? So essentially, they're setting the tone for the relationship that follows, right? And again, we're talking about whether it's an interview, it could be a networking event, right? Could be the first time you're meeting the CEO of one of your clients, could be the first time that you walk into your MD's office, right? When we say first impression, we mean literally in any of these situations, any of these scenarios. Now, keep in mind that the first impression, it's only a 1 to 2 minute window upon first meeting someone. Now, you'll see different theories on this. And again, of course, it's not fixed 1 to 2 minutes. There's different literature out there, different theories, right? Someone might say, hey, 30 seconds, someone else might say 3 minutes. But in general, right, if you just think about it practically speaking, even put yourself in that position, right? Let's say someone comes up to you and introduces themselves. You form your impression of them as well in the first 1 to 2 minutes, right? Maybe 2 minutes tops. They could stand there for half an hour, but I guarantee in the first minute or two, 90% of the impression that you're going to have walking away has been formed. Okay. The other thing is just, make sure that you're nice to everyone you encounter, right? Now, who's the first person? Here's a good question. Who's the first person you encounter when you go to an interview oftentimes? So does anyone want to help me out here? So who's the first person you encounter when you go to an interview? Any thoughts here?
Yes. So the secretary or administrator?
Excellent, Bridal. Excellent. Yep. The secretary, the administrator, right? Receptionist, someone sitting in the lobby, perhaps helping you out, asking you, hey, how's it going? How's your day? Can I get you a cup of coffee? Whatever it might be. Can I lead you to the interview room, right? Many people might seem at first, oh, well, no big deal. I don't need to be super nice to this person, or, well, it's fine. They're not going to have a, impact on my ability to get the job, the interviewing process, my career. Well, you never know, right? And the other thing is, you don't want to be picking and choosing. You don't want to say, well, to this person, I'm going to act this way. To this other person, I'm going to act differently. And well, to this third person, maybe, I won't be so nice. And in general, this goes a really long way, especially in this industry. People know other people, right? Everyone knows everyone. You have to make sure that you're super nice and courteous and respectful of everyone you meet, right? And I mean, it's just good to be that way, right? Just it's good to be have that overall demeanor, have that overall approach to everyone, just being a nice person. But beyond that, you never know who's going to have an influence on the decision to hire you, right? You never know who knows the CEO. You never know who knows the MD that's interviewing you. So not only is it just good to do that, just being a good person in general, but being nice to everyone also will help you in the long run, because you don't know whose influence matters, right? So this is the kind of thing where you have to keep in mind, when you're walking into a networking session, an interview, a client meeting, whatever it might be super nice and respectful of everyone's time, as well as just conversing with everyone. Just make sure that you treat everyone extremely respectful, and as if everyone's really important, right? Because they are, and that's the way you want to look at it, right? Everyone's important. Don't just look at the CEO and say, this is the only person I'm going to treat with respect, or the MD, someone in a senior position. Yeah, and the other thing is, just along those lines, always say please, always say thank you. We see this all the time, and this goes back to what I was saying before. Again, don't reserve those types of phrases only for senior people, right? Even if you walk into an interview, receptionist is sitting there, they offer you a cup of coffee. Hey, thank you so much, I appreciate it. Or no thanks. No thanks, I'm good to go. But use those words. You won't be surprised. You will be surprised how far that will take you. Things like please, thank you, and just being considerate in general. Okay, let's keep going here. So we're going to now get into appearance. Okay, we're going to start with attire and appearance here. Now the question is, what impression are you trying to make, right? What message are you trying to convey? You came to work dressed inappropriately, I would probably be worried that not only would you dress that way in the office, but also with clients and potentially at meetings. But you may say, well, no, I would never dress that way at meetings. But again, you have to look at it from the other person's point of view, not yours. Right? Look at it from your MD or your VP's point of view. If you saw, let's say you were in that position, you saw an intern and analyst come to work not dressed appropriately, you might be concerned as well. Hey, it's your client. Would you put that person in front of your client? Right? So you have to think about it from that angle. Okay, people are going to form opinions about you even before you open your mouth. So the way you dress and your appearance actually goes a long way. Okay, think about an interview setting, right? So just big picture. You're walking into a finance interview. What's appropriate attire? We're going to get into this in more detail in this section, but what type of attire would be inappropriate in an interview setting for a finance job? Any thoughts? So what would be inappropriate for a finance job?
Anything outside of business professional?
Excellent, very good. Anything outside of business professional in a finance interview. Now, if you're going to interview at a tech startup, in Silicon Valley, hey, maybe the standards are a little looser, right? Perhaps you can walk in, maybe with a nice polo shirt, maybe a very nice pair of jeans, potentially, maybe not, maybe dress pants. Again, it's culture, right? You're walking into a big firm, the Apples, the Microsofts, the Ciscos of the world. Fine, maybe a little more professional. You're working into let's say you're walking into a true startup, 5-10 people, 5-10 people in their 20s, started a company recently. It might very well be a lot more casual. They might even tell you that up front, but I would always err on the side of caution, right? Err on the side of being conservative in general. You can't go wrong. Even if in that culture, if you walk in a little overly dressed, a little too formal, hey, that's better than being in the other camp and being underdressed, right? So something to keep in mind in general. Now, as we said, what you wear, that reflects how you are perceived, right? It's very important. What impression are you trying to make? That's the question, right? So, you have to make sure that you don't want to be too casual, you don't want to be too formal, right? Just do your homework. Call up, if you're not sure, just email someone at the company about appropriate dress code. And again, not the big companies. I mean, you know what finance industry is like, right? Very formal, conservative, right? So that's how you dress in the interview setting. But again, if it's not a financial company, well then, just do some homework and make sure that you understand what the dress code would be. Okay, so that another example is pillars. We train at tons of organizations, investment banks, universities, and sure, at banks everyone comes in dressed in business casual at the very least. No one's walking around in jeans and sneakers. But at universities, people are, right? Think about what you wear to class at school, right? We teach a lot at universities, and both at the undergrad as well as the MBA level. And the one thing I could say is, yeah, we have people show up in sweatpants, sweatshirts, sneakers, hoodies all the time, baseball caps, right? All the time in our classes in school, right? Especially, at the undergrad level, it's very common. But does that mean that's how we show up? Do you think we show up that way to teach? Never, right? We're always going to show up dressed professionally, right? It doesn't matter what the people in our audience, the students are wearing. We were always coming at the very least, in business casual, right? Dress pants, dress shirt, dress shoes, right? The very least, okay, if not even more formal. So it's just something to keep in mind, because we always want to create that atmosphere, that classroom environment based on professionalism. Okay, so that's something that you want to keep in mind as well as you're interviewing, as you're attending client meetings. You're even going to work day to day. Okay, your appearance matters. Okay, what you wear matters, especially in this industry. Look the part you want. Now, there's been a lot of studies here, tons of studies on this, right? Wearing nice clothes, it actually boosts your confidence. Okay, so that's actually really important. In addition to how others perceive you, it actually boosts your own confidence. Now, the second point here, boosting your own confidence, it might not be as obvious, but it's very much true, right? Why would you not want to look the part you want? Okay, most CEOs dress a certain way for a reason. As this nice little graphic here, shows, don't dress for the job you have, dress for the job you want, right? Just think about this for a second. Ask yourself if you would feel more confident walking into a boardroom in a suit or casual clothes, and why? Of course, if you walk into a boardroom, right, a corporate boardroom in a suit, you're going to feel a lot more confident, and others will likely take you more seriously, right? As opposed to, not wearing a proper, suit. So just things to keep in mind. That's why you want to make sure that you dress appropriately. It's going to boost your own confidence, and therefore, you'll present better. You will have better dialogue with the clients. You'll be, sharper in terms of doing your job properly if you, do dress appropriately, right? So definitely look the part. That's really important. Now, we have a little case here, right? This study here, it's an actual case by the Wall Street Journal. This was some time back, but this study actually, so let me just give you some background. It put 128 men, ages 18 to about 32, with diverse backgrounds and income levels through role-playing exercises, right? Mock negotiations over the sale of a hypothetical factory. That's really what's going on here, right? To see whether specific kinds of clothing had an effect on the outcomes. The buyer in each case, there's a buyer and seller. The buyer in each case came from one of three groups. One group wore business suits and dress shoes, right? So very formal, the way you would walk into an interview in finance, right? One group wore sweatpants, white t-shirts, plastic sandals. So the complete opposite, very casual. And the third group, referred to as neutrals, they kept wearing the clothing they arrived in. So I'm sure they didn't arrive in sandals, right? So maybe they arrived in jeans, something in the middle, right? That's what they ended up wearing. And then on the other end, meaning on the seller side, we just talked about the buyers. On the seller side, there was a neutral that played the role of seller, meaning someone that just wore the clothing they arrived in. Okay. Now, the negotiators were each given a fair market value for this hypothetical factory, and along with other information that would influence their decisions about whatever the opening bid and ask prices were. What happened was, in the end, the suits, meaning those who were wearing suits that formally dressed, proved much less willing to concede ground during the negotiations. They only moved off their initial offer by an average of about $830,000. You see that at the bottom where it says average concession on the right, compared with about 2.8 million for those in sweatpants. And then in the middle, it happened to be around 1.6 million, about around the midpoint. The bottom line is that those who are well dressed ended up faring much better during the negotiating process, right? So the bottom line is that there's a strong correlation between confidence level and clothing and appearance. Any questions here so far? Okay, now, next page here. So for both women and men, this applies to both women and men. What to actually wear, and this is what the next few slides are about, right? So we're going to go through this rather quickly. Not necessarily reading every bullet, but just kind of hitting on some main points. Again, bottom line, always are on the side of conservatism. Okay, so conservatism. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you can actually afford. Don't show up with extremely expensive clothing or accessories. Right? The MD sitting across from you, let's say, has a cheaper watch or suit than you. Think about what they're going to feel. Right? If you show up with a $10,000, $12,000 Brioni suit, which I would argue most MDs don't even walk around in that, right? I mean, maybe the head of a bank may, but even then, that's something that is extremely expensive. There's no point in you wearing a $10,000, $12,000 suit. I would argue even a $2,000, $1,000 suit, no point, right? Just, get yourself an average, suit that's maybe in the few $100 range. Definitely don't spend more than $300, $500 on a suit. It's just not worth it. A, and B, again, you might create the wrong impression. More importantly, even if you say, no big deal, I can afford it. Again, more importantly, it might create the wrong impression. Okay, so what you want to create is the impression that you're really hungry, you want to work hard, right? You want to make money over time, and you're going to work really hard to essentially get to where the person sitting across from you is. Let's say in an interview setting. Questions here so far. So this is all really important. I just want to stress that because we have seen this happen at the analyst level, at the interim level. I actually remember personally when I first started out back in the day, this was back like 15, 16 years back, when I was a first year analyst, I remember that this new first year analyst was hired right sometime after I was. And they came in with very expensive clothing. And again, at the time, to put things in perspective, it may not be expensive for an MD, for the head of a bank, but for an intern or a first-year analyst, this guy came in every day wearing, $400 or $500 shoes, $300, $400 shirts, right? That didn't really help his case anyway, right? I mean, his goal was to just show off his appearance and, hey, I can afford this, I can afford that. It didn't really help anyway. I mean, the year, came around and let's just say that all of that was just for show, and performance matters much more, of course, right? So dress well, make sure your clothes fit impeccably, of course, but again, that's more about fit than price, right? The brand or price is not relevant. What matters is that the clothes fit properly, right? Which, as long as you have them tailored, at any department store, you'll be in good shape, right? No need to buy a super expensive a suit, a watch, things like that. Okay, now let's keep going here. Now for men, now we've also broken out the next couple of slides here into men versus women. So for men, right, wear a dark colored suit which fits well. Make sure shoes are polished, right? Keep the socks normal colors. We see people sometimes walking around with crazy bright orange, green socks, things like that. I mean, all of that is, again, after you establish yourself, your credibility. If you want to go that route, hey, nothing wrong with that. But I wouldn't walk in day one with bright orange socks, right? Just think about the image that creates, right? You want to create an image, again, that you're fitting in with respect to the attire. You understand the industry, and you're doing what it takes to get ahead, and not going too far off on a tangent in terms of crazy types of clothing like bright orange socks, right? And again, we've seen this, and it doesn't create the best impression. Right, just something else to keep in mind, because we've seen people not follow these rules, but again, very important, because keep in mind, sometimes you're meeting clients and You have to make sure that you're dressing appropriately and your shoes match your belt, things like this, right? So if you have a black belt, black shoes, brown belt, brown shoes, right? Things like that. You have to just make sure you're abiding by standard rules of fashion and clothing. But make sure that if you do have facial hair, and it's, over time, again, this depends on the firm and the culture of that firm. But, as well as location, of course, geography in New York, things are a little more formal than in, perhaps in Florida or California, right? So a lot of this has to do with where you're working, of course. So depending on again, the culture and where you're working the firm, facial hair may be acceptable. If it is, hey, great, but just, make sure you can be clean, shave in the morning, the morning of your interview, every day, of course, as well. If you're, on the job, make sure you're shaving every morning. Just keep everything nice and clean and trimmed. That's really important. If indeed facial hair is actually allowed, because again, it depends on the firm, and some firms and some teams are, of course, more conservative than others. For women here on the next page, just be thoughtful given the industry, but there might be a little more leeway here, but you still got to be conservative in general. Again, like it says at the top, classic skirt suit, pantsuit, a navy or black suit, right? White dress shirt, make sure everything's tailored. Really important, right? Nothing super flashy, make sure you're not wearing super flashy jewelry, but you don't want to attract attention to that sort of stuff, right? You want people to focus on your ability to get the job done. You want people to focus on how hard you're working, your performance on the job, right? More than things like this. Okay, the bottom line is dress for success, right? Attire is very important. While what you wear is not going to win you the job, I can guarantee that dressing inappropriately, especially highly inappropriately, can cost you the job. So that's something you want to walk into work with every day, keeping in mind. Right? It's that bubble at the bottom here that we have in blue. Okay, you don't want to be remembered for your attire. Put it that way. All right, now, maximizing the power of your voice, right? Pace, pitch, and projection. 3 very important points to keep in mind. Right? Pace is basically, how fast you're talking, right? Are you talking really quickly? Are you talking slowly? Right? If you notice, even throughout this presentation, I could be talking very fast like this. I could just go through every single bullet, pace, pitch, projection, boom, 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 hit every bullet and go on. But is that going to actually help everyone absorb the material? No. And if I speak uber slow, that's not going to help either, of course, right? So I just have to talk in a normal voice, right? Just at an average pace. And I would argue, especially in a setting like this via webinar where, we're not seeing each other, I would argue maybe even slightly slower than average is helpful. So people truly understand what you're saying, have time to absorb the material, right? That's how we run all of our webinars, of course, right? So it's just things to keep in mind. If I was live in front of you in person, maybe marginally faster, not too much more, but maybe, 3% faster, something like that, right? Just very marginally faster. But again, you don't want to speak too fast, too slow, because, you may lose your audience that way. And people may not even understand and follow what you're saying. Okay, questions here. Okay, the other thing is pitch, right? Varying the inflection in your voice, right? That's going to spark interest in what you're saying. But you don't want to be too monotone, right? So whether it's too high pitch, low pitch, just vary the pitch in your voice, right? You don't want to just keep it at the same pitch throughout. Let's say you're, presenting at a meeting, right? For one of your clients, let's say you're interviewing as well, same concept, right? You want to make sure that what you're saying is interesting at the same time. The way you're saying it is interesting as well. It's different, right? So you want to vary the pitch, vary the pace a bit. Projection is important as well, right? We, of course, are teaching for a living. So we are used to, at this point, speaking really loudly and, consistently speaking loud and, conveying energy. But again, if you're new to the whole speaking world and presenting world, that's something that a lot of people underappreciate, but you do want to make sure that you're projecting, right? Volume is really important. You want to make sure that, your audience knows that you're in command of the room. So the louder, I'm not saying scream, but to the extent that you're speaking really softly, and being shy, let's say, it's just not going to create the best impression. So I would argue that's something you want to practice, right? Practice with friends, practice, just in your room, maybe with the roommate, whatever it might be. But you want to practice these 3 bullets on this page. pace, pitch, and projection, projecting your voice, okay, with energy. That's really important when communicating. Communication competency. Now, important to keep in mind all of these points here as you're speaking to others. The next several pages here, not reading every bullet here, but the bottom line is, just make sure that you kind of go through all these bullets and really keep all of these things in mind as you're speaking. Okay, and I would argue these points apply not just in the workplace, but also in our personal lives when speaking to friends as well as relatives, not just with colleagues. And a lot of this boils down to, carefully listening to the other person and responding accordingly, keeping the conversation on track by maintaining a positive attitude throughout the conversation. Right? These are things that will all improve your communication skills. Now, take a minute and ask yourself these questions at the bottom. Right? Do you smile when speaking to clients or employees? Right? Do you use your hands or other gestures to convey meaning? Do you turn towards people when you speak? Do you look animated? Right? It's these things that you really want to keep in mind. And the more of these you can say yes to, the better. Okay? The more of these you can say yes to, the better. Interpersonal skills, nonverbal communication. Now, seems obvious, right? All of these items here, looking down, looking sideways, stretching, looking at your phone, slouching in your seat, right? But these are all examples of nonverbal communication to avoid. You'd be surprised how many people, how many interns and analysts we've seen do these things in meetings. It could be a meeting of 5, 10, 15 people. You'd be surprised how many do these things constantly, look on the side, yawn, look sideways, like cross your hands over your chest. That just shows disinterest, actually. Keeping a far distance from the speaker. I'm assuming you're standing up. If you're sitting in a conference room, then you can't really avoid that too much. But if you're actually in person, standing next to someone, make sure that you're not too far away, you're not too close, right? Just maintain a couple feet distance. Right. So these things you want to just keep in mind in terms of nonverbal communication. Here's examples of good nonverbal communication. Okay, so smiling, with raised eyebrows, maintaining eye contact, right, standing up straight, sitting straight, depending on, again, whether you're sitting in a meeting or standing, either way. Firm handshake, right? Don't keep your hands close to your face, right? Just keep them on your side, in your pocket, for example. Again, don't cross them over your chest, right? Because, again, that would show disinterest potentially. Okay, so just things to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to communication, honestly, half the battle is listening. Half the battle is listening. When you say yes to all the questions at the bottom, but do you give the speaker your full attention? Do you look at the person who's speaking? Can you repeat back what was said or summarize the conversation? But to avoid using technology. Especially these days, avoid looking at your phone, right? This wasn't an issue 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, as phones were relatively new, but I would argue in the last 10 years, especially with smartphones. So really in the last 10, 12 years, with the advent of smartphones, as opposed to just the, simple phones back in the day, just the flip phones, that's different. But these days, especially with everyone walking around with the smartphone, just make sure that you're not constantly looking at the phone. Okay, or even I would argue once in a while, if you're talking to someone, especially at a senior level, right, an MD client of yours, as much as is humanly possible, avoid looking at your phone, right? That shows disrespect. If you absolutely have to, let's say you're waiting on an email from an MD that's urgent or something along those lines, then just be polite and excuse yourself first. Okay, now how to improve interpersonal skills, right? These come in handy when listening, problem solving, and decision making. So improving these skills is super helpful. But as you can see here, we have some tips to help you improve your interpersonal skills, right? Things like solving brain teasers and puzzles, right? Those are going to help you with your problem solving abilities. Okay, so, we have some just things here on the page. You can see, hey, for decision making, let's try using strategies like the Venn diagram, maybe a pro or con list, right? You have pros on one side of the page, cons on the other. Okay, so just things that's going to help you in your interpersonal skills. Now, next page, perception. Really important to know your audience, right? Keep in mind that it's these types of perception issues that can lead to to distortions or, biases or judgments, which further impede the effective communication process, right? Meaning, people come from different backgrounds. Everyone has different past experiences, different cultural backgrounds, different physiology. By that, we just mean age, gender, physical characteristics, things like this. That all affect the way that they're going to respond to you, and they're going to take in your information and interpret what you're saying, right? So it's just stuff you have to really keep in mind, right? Individuals just naturally, it's human nature, but people use generalizations, to inaccurately, judge people. People transfer their own weaknesses and faults onto others, right? It's this sort of stuff that you want to at least keep in mind when you're talking to someone else, right? Important, again, to know your audience. That's really important. I mean, as it says at the bottom here, right? People respond to these stages here, right? Based on your background and these different items at the bottom, they're going to interpret what you're saying differently. Okay, so just something to keep in mind, if you're talking to someone. Now, next page here, self-aware and adaptive communicator. Self-awareness is huge. Okay, just be aware of your own strengths and weaknesses. Okay, as it says here at the top, a successful speaker has the ability to recognize introspectively their own, right, talents, personality, traits, skills, all of that, right? And that's actually something that I would argue is very important, being able to look internally and say, hey, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm not good at. Let me work at what I'm not good at. All right, now we're getting to an extremely important topic here, email etiquette and social media etiquette. Okay, especially
I'm sorry, it's Carrie. Before we moved on, if you don't mind, we did get a question about clothing in particular.
Perfect. Yeah.
That I wanted to call out. Jalen asks, how many suits would you recommend that they have? And
Excellent.
As a follow-up, do you have any specific brands you would recommend?
Excellent question. So I would say suits wise, maybe 3-4 suits would make sense. I mean, again, there's no magic number here. Do you need 10? Probably not. Is 1 enough? Probably not, right? Because 3 or 4 is a good number. And I'm saying that because I would keep at least 1 or 2 at home. I would keep 1 in the office at all points in time. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's actually an excellent question, because that leads me to a very important point. Even if you're working at a bank where you're going in day-to-day business casual, you may never know when you're going to be called into the meeting. This has happened to me several times, and I've seen this happen to other people several times. I've seen people get caught off guard. You're going into work, it's business casual, all of a sudden a meeting comes up. In 30 minutes, you have to show up, into a conference room or hop into a car and go see a client. Well, you don't have a suit. What do you do, right? So you have to make sure that you keep, I would argue, no matter how you're walking into the office with every day, keep a suit at work. Keep 1 suit there. Of course, keep a suit at home, right? You never know. Someone's going to call you up. Hey, we have a meeting in half an hour at this location. You're not in the office. You need to jump to, in a car and go to that location. You need a suit at home. That's 2 right there. And you never want the bare minimum. So that's why I'm saying 3 to 4, and then add another 1 or 2 on top of that, just for safety. Hey, something spills. You have your suit's in dry cleaning, right? Your suit's, it's in the wash. So that's why I'm saying 3 to 4. In terms of brands, so there's a ton of brands out there. I mean, what I would say is, without getting to specific brands, just keep it simple. Something, if you want department stores, I actually have personally, gone to Macy's, stores like that, just kind of, in terms of price, just mid-price, anything on the low to mid-price side would be fine. Nothing overly expensive. Again, I would say something at the intern analyst level in the, $200 to $400, $500 range would be perfect. I wouldn't probably go above that range. You definitely don't need to. If you want to, that's fine. Don't go too much above that. Again, you don't want to create the wrong impression, again, by wearing, a Brioni suit or something along those lines. But, something that $200 to, $400 or $500 range would be perfect. If you go to, large department stores like Macy's, there's tons of suits they have by tons of different, brands. So, any of that would work. But yeah, again, brand wise, there's, J. Crew, Perry Ellis, there's tons of brands. I would avoid the very expensive designers, right? There's a lot of expensive, Italian designers, things like that out there. I probably wouldn't walk in day one with a Versace suit, something along those lines. But, anything in the middle of the road, I would say would be fine brand wise. So. but I would say don't worry too much about that. The most important thing is, does the suit fit well, and is the color appropriate? Is it kind of a dark brown, black, blue type of suit that will be appropriate? Does it fit well? Right, that's the most important thing, rather than what's the brand, if that makes sense. Okay, any other questions here?
What are your thoughts on pinstripe suits?
I mean, again, I would just keep it simple, keep it solid colored. If you have to wear a pinstripe, keep the pinstripes light. I wouldn't have very dark, very what's the word? Very blatant, very gaudy pinstripes. I've seen that as well. Again, if you're a senior level executive, hey, wear whatever you want. But at the intern or analyst level, I would avoid flashy pinstripes. If they're light colored and they're skinny pinstripes, hey, fine. But again, you don't want overly flashy pinstripes, if that makes sense. I mean, there's different types of pinstripes, but as long as it's light and not too gaudy, I would say that's fine. But hey, I mean, I would just keep it simple. No need even then, right? No need. No one's gonna fault you for not wearing pinstripes, right? Again, you have to be conservative. If you're not sure, if you're uncertain, or on the side of conservativeness is the way I look at it. So if you can avoid pinstripes, hey, go for it. If you want them, if you just absolutely love them and you want them, hey, nothing wrong with it, but just keep it very non-flashy is what I would say. Okay, so email etiquette. Now, the most important thing here to remember is that unlike what you say, emails are memorialized forever, right? You can't take back what you wrote if you later regret it. So just think twice before hitting the send button, right? That's the bottom line. A lot of this is self-explanatory, right? Be formal, professional, be clear, polite, of course. But that's one thing I do want to point out, right? Emails are forever. Unlike, if you're just meeting someone one-on-one quickly, over a cup of coffee, that's one thing. Even then, you want to still, keep it professional and all of that. But I would argue, especially in writing, right? You can't take back what you wrote. Okay, so, once you write it, you hit send, it's there forever, right? That's generally what you want to keep in mind anytime you're sending an email or writing any document and sending it off. Again, not reading every bullet, but the big picture here is keep it professional, right? Of course, use correct grammar, quickly acknowledge emails if someone sends you an email. If you make an error, again, own up to it, right? Don't blame anyone else. We talked about that before, right? Make sure that you own up to your own mistakes. Okay, and again, at the bottom, like it says, once an email is sent, it can't be retracted. You don't know who else is going to read your email besides the intended recipient. They might forward it to someone else. You just have to keep that in mind when you're sending someone an email. Now, on this page here, no need for exclamation points, no need for caps, right? Evaluate the email. What's wrong with it? Well, you don't need the U in caps. You don't need pick it up in caps. You don't need 3 exclamation marks. Unnecessary, right? The note is not empathetic at all. It's rude. It's not, it's just not appropriate in the workplace. Are emails ever sent like this? Sure, we see it. Is it a good idea? No. Is it a good idea for an intern or an analyst to send an email like this? Definitely not. Yeah, definitely not. I mean, no one should be sending an email like this, but it's one thing if the head of your group or the MD sends an intern an email like this because they're stressed. And again, there's no excuse, but hey, does it happen time to time? Sure. But what I would argue is, as an intern, as an analyst, as an associate, right, at the junior levels, don't even think about sending emails like this to anyone else. Okay, and again, you might look at it and say, well, why would I have to send someone else an email like this as an intern? And I would say, well, sure, maybe not day one, but over time, as you're working with other people, in other teams, you might have someone doing something for you. It doesn't even have to be another analyst or intern. It might be someone in, could be someone in HR. It could be someone in a library putting together, pulling up transactions for you, something like this, right? It could be someone in let's say in the copy room. It could be someone that is, just doing anything for you, right? That's putting together a book for you. That's binding a presentation for you, something like this. Maybe someone else in the presentation room working on a PowerPoint slide for you, right? So yes, it is possible that people will be doing work for you even from the get-go as an intern, but you want to make sure that you're respectful. Again, this goes back to what I said before. Be respectful and courteous of everyone's time. Really, really important, and it's going to go a long way towards creating the best possible impression. Social media. This is super relevant, especially to this generation. Okay, keep in mind everything you write or post on TikTok, on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of these sites that you see at the bottom, right? You see the icons at the bottom. Just any of these, anything you post on it, anything you write on it, they might be seen by your colleagues and bosses, and importantly, any future employers, right? And I'm sure all of you guys have seen in the media, just disaster stories of, people getting fired or people running into big problems because of something they posted on, Snapchat, on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago. Just keep that in mind from today, every day going forward. Everything you post on social media, assume it's going to be read by every future employer you will have. And that's just the nature. There's pros, but again, there's cons of, the whole social media concept today, right? Unlike 30, 40 years ago where this wasn't an issue, there's pros, but again, there's cons. You have to keep in mind all the cons, all the downsides as well of posting. So just be wary of that. Again, I are on the side of being conservative. If you're hesitant about posting something, I'd say it's very simple. Don't post it, period. Okay, now conducting a meeting, workplace etiquette. Many of the points here pertain to the person running the meeting, but important to note here as well for you guys as an intern, as an analyst, because you may be involved in much of the legwork, such as setting up the meetings, sharing the agenda with everyone attending, sending out calendar invites, right? All of that. When we say on time, we mean be early. Okay, if an MD shows up on time and the meeting's at 8 a.m., that means they'll probably get there at 7:58. Who knows? If you as an intern or an analyst are on time to that 8 a.m. meeting, it means you're there by 7:45 at the latest. If you're there at 7:50 or even 7:47, I would argue you're late. If the meeting is 7:45, or rather 8 o'clock rather, show up by 7:45, that's your job, right? As the junior person, you're responsible for showing up early, making sure everything is set up, right? Making sure everyone is good to go. Maybe there's a client there, the CFO of one of your clients needs a cup of coffee. Well, take care of that. Okay, maybe someone doesn't have a book that was passed out. Take care of that. Okay, maybe there's there's pens missing from the table. Hey, take care of that, right? Maybe the projector is not working, right? Again, it's your responsibility to make sure the meeting runs smoothly as a junior person. So again, showing up early ensures that you have time to figure things out. Okay. And again, the other thing is, as a junior person, I would argue this can't be understated, but take notes on everything, especially every single number discussed. If you're sitting in a meeting, people are talking, take notes. Take notes on literally everything that's being discussed, and any numbers that are being discussed, being said, write them down. You never know later on who's going to ask you to, put together a summary of what was said in a Word document and email it around. Okay, that's happened to me tons of times. As an analyst, as an associate, right? That's happened to me quite often, where I'm sitting in a meeting and then afterwards an MD will email me saying, hey, can you just shoot me a quick summary of that meeting? And by summary, they don't mean one sentence, right? They mean, a multi-page Word document. Assuming the meeting is, an hour or two, then they mean a multi-page Word document with all the details as much as possible that I could write down that summarizes what was said. And definitely every number, right? Maybe there was a sales projection discussed. Maybe there was an EBITDA margin discussed in the meeting. Write it down. Okay, very important. Workplace etiquette. Now, the workplace has changed over the last 5-10 years. We know that, right? With many companies adopting an open layout policy. But the big picture here is just be mindful and respectful of your colleagues. Okay, meaning, keep your workspace clean and tidy. Use headphones to listen to music if that's acceptable. And if you work, if you're more productive that way, then fine, use headphones. But just make sure that you keep the music low. Right? Just don't put it super high, right? So the person next to you can't hear. Don't have loud conversations if you're on the phone. It's just things that you may say, oh, of course, it's obvious, but again, in an open layout, of course, you want to keep this in mind even more. Now on to table manners.
Alok.
Yep.
Sorry, it's Carrie again. Just got a couple more questions in the chat.
Yep, sure. Of course, yeah.
Charles asks, regarding notes, should we take them in laptops? Or should we take them in an iPad or a notebook?
Excellent question. So these days, yeah, if you have a laptop at work, I would definitely bring, a laptop, a calculator, a notepad, all of this with you to every meeting. Again, a laptop, I mean, if it's a quick, meeting for 5 minutes in your MD's office, and you're just running there with a notepad and a calculator and a pen, that may suffice. But if it's a more formal meeting, I would definitely bring your briefcase, your laptop bag, basically, with your laptop, your notepad, calculator, pen, all of that, definitely. Just be prepared to make calculations on the spot. You could take notes on a notepad, that's fine as well, or on an iPad. There's no written rule on this. It's not black and white. But what I would say is the only downside of using a laptop is it depends how you type as well, right? If you're like me and you type, you're banging on your keyboard really hard, it could be distracting in a meeting. So that's just something to keep in mind. It also depends on your handwriting. If your handwriting is not the best, like mine isn't, I have a pretty horrible handwriting, well, you may want to use an iPad or a laptop as well. Some people's handwriting is fantastic. If that's the case, hey, you use a notepad and pen. So a lot of this, I would say, is really case by case and personal as well, right? Again, if you type slow and you're banging on your keyboard, but you're a great your handwriting is great, hey, write things down by hand, right? And vice versa. If you're okay typing on a computer lightly, you're not banging on the keyboard, and your handwriting is horrible, well, then of course, use an iPad or a laptop. So I would say that's more case by case. But also get to know your team, right? Maybe your MD doesn't want you in there with a laptop banging away at the keyboard. So I mean, that's the kind of thing where you understand what other people on your team are doing, what the general process is, what people do normally, and then that's how you would adapt it, is what I would say there. But again, that's not a black and white situation, because I've seen both. I've been in meetings with a notepad taking notes, and I've been in meetings with a laptop taking notes as well. So.
And then as a follow-up to that, do you have some suggestions on ways to organize notes and aspects to highlighting?
Great question. So I would say by topic for sure. So if you're sitting in a long 2-hour meeting and they're discussing, tons of different topics, just, maybe one section is financials, right? Financial projections. Maybe another section of the meeting is discussing the business strategy. Maybe another section is, updates to, recent products and services the company has announced that they're planning on marketing soon, right? So depending on what the agenda is and what the topics are, break it out by topic for sure, especially if the document is long. If it's just a small paragraph, that's one thing of, 5-10 minute meeting. But if there's, a ton of different topics, you have 5 pages of notes, the biggest thing I would say is, yes, that's an excellent question. Break it out by topic. You break it out by topic, right? Organize it by topic, and the topic should be organized by the way the meeting took place. If the financials were discussed first, well, then in your notes, when you're taking notes, put the financials up front, right? If the financials were discussed last, well, then put the financials at the end. So I would generally go in order of the meeting, if that makes sense. So the way that the topics were discussed in the meeting, that's how I would probably lay them out in your notes as well, if that makes sense. But yeah, again, it's also not a black and white question. It's more of a organization question, and also the way you're comfortable laying out your notes, right? I mean, everyone has a slightly different style, but what I would say is the biggest thing I would say is just follow the order of the meeting, meaning how things were discussed in the meeting. That's the way you should be organizing your notes, and then breaking it out by topic. That's important. So people can quickly jump to the topic. If your MD may just want to jump to the financials, which is frankly often the case, right? I mean, let's be honest, the numbers and the financials are often the most important. Well, you want to make sure that they know where that is in your document. So, okay, so now just a couple of pages here at the end before we pause, before we get into time management. We'll have a small break in the middle as well. Just quickly spending a minute or two on these slides here. So why are table manners important here? You might wonder, why is this relevant? Well, you may be dining with your boss. You might be dining with clients of your firm, right? Say dinner after a management presentation, for example. I've definitely been there, quite a few times, where after a management presentation, everyone goes out to dinner, right? That's the whole point of the next couple of slides, right? Just telling you what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing. Okay, so there's a lot of, again, not reading every bullet here, but just you guys can go through all of this as well, but just, make sure that you go through these bullet by bullet, right? Just wait to begin eating, of course, until the host begins, right? Place a dinner napkin, fold it in half in your lap, right? The fold being towards you. If you must leave the table, right? Put your fork and knife on the plate, place your napkin on the seat of your chair, right? Just things like this you want to keep in mind here. Same thing on the next page, right? Just make sure that you don't chew with your mouth open, right? Don't make a big deal if you spill something. Don't hold the red wine by the stem, hold white wine by the stem, right? Make sure that you don't, and we've seen this happen as well, make sure you avoid ordering food that could be a challenge. Do not order, crab legs that come with that metal cracking tool, fried chicken, spaghetti. Why? It's going to make a mess, and it's just going to cause you confusion and problems, right? You don't want things spilling all over the place. You don't want to make a mess at dinner. So order something simple and clean, if that makes sense. Something that's easy to eat, basically. Idioms and jargon. All right, so now we have a couple of pages here, but the bottom line is just keep in mind that, especially with an international audience, you want to keep in mind they may not be aware of all the customs common in the U.S. like in English, right, in the U.S. So things like let's touch base tomorrow. He let the cat out of the bag, put it on the back burner, right? There's others as well. Bite the bullet. Elephant in the room. Let's raise it up the flagpole to indicate. Let's raise it up in terms of the hierarchy, right? So let's get the MD's opinion as well. Someone higher up. Just don't use these phrases too often if you're dealing with especially international clients, people outside of the U.S., non-U.S. colleagues, non-U.S. clients, right? Because then they may not know exactly what you're saying, and if you're taking the time to explain their meaning, then the flow of the conversation is lost, right? So try to avoid all of these types of idioms. Business jargon. Right? Business has its own set of words, phrases, and acronyms. So if you're saying DSO, diluted shares outstanding, is that what you mean? Do you mean day sales outstanding? What do you mean, right? So if you have doubts, just, hey, write it out is what I would say. If in any doubt, just spell everything out the first time around. Okay, finally, last slide here. Just be aware of humor in any gestures that you're using. Right? In the US, for example, a thumbs up is a positive gesture, right? But the thing is, in some places, for example, the Middle East, it's actually the equivalent of, right, the middle finger. I mean, believe it or not, this is the kind of thing you have to be aware of internationally, right? A lot of people are just focused on the US, right? Hey, what's okay in the US? But you're dealing with an international audience, you very much have to keep in mind what different jokes or different gestures might mean outside of the US, right? The OK symbol, what you see the gentleman at the bottom here making an OK symbol with their hands. That's okay in the US. That's what it means, okay in the US. But in Brazil, that's actually a rude gesture, right? Back in the day, actually, Richard Nixon, ex-president of the US, he actually once visited Brazil, flashed the OK sign to a waiting crowd, and he was actually responded to with boos, right? Because doesn't mean the same thing there. So just in general, I would avoid that with non-US audiences as well. All right, guys, thanks so much. That concludes the professional presence presentation. I want to give everyone 5 minutes just before we jump into the next presentation on time management. So if you guys want to just take 5 minutes, come back, and then we'll spend the subsequent hour on that. That will be great. Okay, so appreciate everyone's time here. Just take 5 minutes, get some coffee, a restroom break, whatever you need. Come back in 5 minutes. We're going to jump into the next presentation. Thank you.
Also, everyone, the links have been posted now in the chat. The links to your individual track to find these decks. So feel free to download them for the next session. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, you're good to go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and welcome to the second soft skills seminar. We are now going to be covering time management. It's very important. So as you can imagine, time management, especially in finance, is extremely critical. Given how many hours you'll be working, right? Not being able to manage time can lead to serious repercussions. So with that, let's get into it. Here's an overview of the topics we'll be going through. Okay, so you can see that starting with an overview, different types of bad habits people have, and ultimately ending with living a healthy lifestyle. All right, now, we keep stressing efficiency, right? You see here, time management is a synonym for efficiency. As much as we stress efficiency, what's really important here is to understand that what we really mean is effective time management. We say this a lot in our modeling classes. For those of you that have taken modeling with us, right, we always say, oh, accuracy, of course, is always number one, as you know, but efficiency, hey, that's a close second, right? We stress shortcuts, all of that good stuff. Well, when we say that, when we say efficiency, what do we really mean? what we mean is effective time management, right? Efficiency, it's tied to time management. If we had all the time in the world, hey, there's no point in being efficient, right? Take forever. But we don't have all the time in the world. That's the point. So being efficient is paramount, very important. Okay, and that's the whole point here. Get things done accurately, but in a reasonably fast amount of time as well. Of course, in the industry, time is money, as you know. So getting things done on time is very important. Now, the most important resource you have is time. That's what you see here at the bottom in the blue bubble. Okay, if we had, let's say 1,000 hours in a day, you might think, yeah, everyone would accomplish everything they wanted. Is that true? I would argue, probably not. Okay, many of us would still persist with the same bad habits. You'd still run out of time. You still would have a list of things at the end of the day that wasn't done, right? Because if your habit is to always, overestimate what we can accomplish in a given period of time, well, it doesn't matter whether you have 24 hours in a day or 1,000 hours in a day. You're going to keep overestimating what you could accomplish and not get everything done. Okay, so just something to really to keep in mind in terms of time management, right? To just make sure that you understand that the most important resource you have is time. Okay, so don't ignore it, don't waste it. Now, the most precious resource, as we said, is time, right? That's eaten up by a lot of bad habits. What's a good example here of when someone didn't really think about this carefully? Well, I'll give you an example here. A friend that I know of, their driver's license actually came due for renewal. And she could have done it by mail or online. Well, she ended up putting it off until the expiration date passed. And then she thought, yeah, you know what, I'll just go into the office. Well, guess what? The office ended up closing because of COVID-19, right? So basically, this was about a year back, right? A little over that. The office ended up closing because of COVID-19. And then her next conclusion was, oh, I don't really need a license, right? Because I live in New York, it's not imperative. So then it expired. Then what? Well, she ended up moving to the suburbs with a new job. So now what? She has to retest to get a driver's permit and then take a driving test to get a new license. Now, is it possible? Sure, she can do all that, right? That's not the point. The point is now she's wasting 10 times the amount of time she would have spent if she just went online and did it in 5-10 minutes and renewed it, right? But she wasn't thinking in advance. She was thinking, oh yeah, I'll get to it one day, I'll get to it one day, right? When again, it was only a 5-10 minute process, right? So it's just stuff like that. You don't want to put things off if you don't have to. Okay, next slide here. Now on this slide and the next slide, we have a number of common bad habits, and we're going to be exploring these throughout the presentation, right? In terms of walking in and starting the day late, just something to point out. If you're working from home, well, the boss can't see you walk in, right, and start work. So then to let your employer know that you're quote unquote in, right, on time, log into your computer, start work, right, email a colleague with important information, text your boss, text your colleague with an update to a recent deal or project you're working on, right? Just make it known that you're out there, you're available. Okay, again, the phrase perception is reality, we say that a lot. That very much applies here. Okay, so just please keep that in mind. If you are working from home, well, you do want to still make sure that your employer knows that you're available, you're there, you're working, you're getting things done. If that means you have to send an email to them, a text, or whatever your method of communication is with the people you're working with regularly, just let them know, right? Just send off that communication, let them know, yeah, you're on it, you're working away, you're getting things done, right? Very important. The more common bad habits here, I'm sure all of you can probably identify with some of these, right? But what you want to keep in mind is that a couple of things. Number one, switching between tasks, that's actually a very common problem, right? Especially in the finance industry where you have so many things going on. But and sometimes you don't have a choice, right? But if you do have a choice, try to avoid it is what I would say, right? Because it takes 20 minutes, I mean, just based on studies done over the years, on average, it takes 20 minutes to refocus after a person's taken away from a task. A quick question by a team member, that might eat up 20, 30 minutes of your time. Add in the 20 minutes to refocus that and you've just lost an hour, right? So literally a team member coming by, a colleague of yours coming by and asking some questions you might think might take up 5 minutes. Before you know it, by the time you'll be focused on what you're doing, an hour might go by. And we see this all the time. So just try to really not get distracted if possible. The other thing is finding quiet space, really important, right? Based on, again, studies, 58% of high performing employees say that they need more private space than can be found, right, at their office to do problem solving. 62% of employees think their office environments are too distracting, right? So you want to try to make sure that wherever you're working, whether it's at home, whether it's in the office, the environment is not too distracting. If it means putting on headphones, putting on earplugs, do that. If it means working in an area, let's say it's an open environment, an open workspace, a lot of companies have migrated to that. Well, find an area where maybe there's not tons of people around you, right? The bottom line is do what you can to maximize your productivity. And if that means organizing your workspace, finding quiet space, then that's what you have to do. At the bottom, live a healthy lifestyle. Very important as well here. Think of your physical and emotional body as a machine that's going to accomplish all the tasks that you need to accomplish that day, right? And it's your body that's going to allow you to live a long life, right? Well, guess what? You want to take care of it. You want to take care of that machine. Right? It sounds silly, but again, we see this every day, right? People eating unhealthy on the desk, not exercising at all. You might say, well, but what if I don't have a lot of time to exercise, right? I'm working, 90 hours, 80 hours, maybe 100 hours, whatever it is a week. How do I have time to go to the gym? And I would argue it's not just about going to the gym, just day to day, right? Go for a quick walk, right? Just, I do this myself. We just jump to the floor, hammer out a few push-ups, right? It doesn't take any time at all, I would argue. You have a minute to go, there you go. There's 20 push-ups right there, 30 push-ups right there, right? Seems silly, but again, over the course of an entire day, it really adds up. It doesn't have to be at once, right? We're not saying take an hour, at 2 p.m. and go to the gym and make it a point, because that may not be an option depending on where you're working. But again, just from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, everyone has a few minutes. Again, we're not talking 1 hour, 2 hours, but 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it might be, to just get your body moving a bit, get some basic exercise in, things like that, right? You don't even need equipment. You don't need treadmills. You don't need anything like this, right? Just all you need is the ability to, go out there and maybe just walk around a bit. On a floor, you can do things like sit-ups, push-ups, crunches, planks. There's tons of exercises you can do just with your body and with the floor, right? So things like that you want to keep in mind. A lot of people give excuses. Oh, well, I don't have time to go all the way to a gym and change and work out and come back, and I just lost an hour and a half. You don't need that, right? I mean, especially in COVID, I haven't gone to the gym in over a year. Does that mean I haven't worked out? Nope. Just in my apartment, I just drop to the floor, hammer out some floor exercises, and you're good to go, right? So, just things to keep in mind. All right, starting your day on time. Now, most people get up as late as possible, especially in finance, right? Just to barely make it to work on time. But you want to try to avoid that if possible. It's not the best strategy to maximize productivity. Now we get it. You don't have all the time in the world. Okay, we understand it's finance, it's right, especially in this industry. We get it. We've been there, right? I mean, during my analyst years, during my associate years, I didn't have, the ability to get 10 hours of sleep every night, 8 hours of sleep every night, of course. But even if it's 30 minutes extra, an hour extra, it makes a big difference, right? So even if you can try to get 6 hours, 7 hours, hey, that's helpful. Is it going to happen every night? Probably not. But you want to at least do what you can, right? Try to do what you can to make it to 6-7 hours if possible. It's going to improve your productivity, right? That might mean not watching TV at night, right? Late at night, things like that. But you have to see what you can do, right? Try to get in as much sleep as possible. Okay, that's very important, and it directly correlated to your productivity and performance at work as well. Starting your day on time. Be cognizant of the message that you're going to send by habitually arriving to work late, right? What kind of a message are you sending? Well, apathy, right? You're just indifferent about the job, lack of enthusiasm for your job and career development, self-entitlement, that's a big one. That you believe the job should work to your schedule. Well, no, it shouldn't, right? You have to work to the job schedule. it makes it seem like you're not organized. If you're just showing up, kind of whenever you want, you're not managing time effectively, and all of these are negatives, right? You don't want to send those messages. In the example I gave earlier, most people spend a lot of time watching TV. The average adult spends 2.5 hours a day watching TV. And in finance, you may not have that much time, but you don't want to waste time right before bed watching TV. That's not helpful at all, especially if you're not getting enough sleep. Okay, be aware of your internal clock. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, most people I know are either morning people or night people, right? I'm actually, just personally speaking, hey, I'm a night owl. My business partner, some of you might have seen him, Matthew, in an earlier class, he's an early bird. Well, hey, nothing wrong with either approach, right? Everyone's internal clock is different. Okay, that's perfectly acceptable, but it's important to know what your internal clock is and how it works, right? How it functions, because that should actually lead you to doing certain types of work at certain points in the day, right? Try to tackle your most challenging tasks when you're when you're mostly on point. Okay, so if you're really tired at night or really tired in the morning, you have to take all this into account in terms of when you're tackling your most challenging tasks. And that's the point. Now, applying the circadian rhythm to your day, right? Again, the key here is to take on the hardest jobs when you're at your peak energy level. That's really the bottom line. And you might, as we're going through some of these slides, you might now see how you may need to reconstruct your workflow, how you need to think about when you accomplish certain tasks. If you just think about it like, oh, I just have to do A, B, and C in the morning, A, B, X, Y, Z in the afternoon, and you don't want to necessarily memorize it that way. You want to think to yourself, hey, when do I have the most energy? And that's when you should tackle the most challenging tasks. Okay, now once you identify your rhythm, apply the Pomodoro technique. What does this mean? This means you're breaking the work day, right? All of the time you have during the day to work. You're breaking it up into smaller units to complete particular tasks in chunks of 25 to 40 minutes. Okay, and then after you're done, take a 5-minute break. And then after 3 to 6 of these segments, take a longer break, right? A half an hour break or so, right? And then just repeat that throughout the day. Right now, this can of course be applied at home or in the office, but the only thing I would say is at home, just make sure that half an hour doesn't, translate into 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, right? As you're finishing chores, catching up with friends on the phone, things like that. Because in the office, at least everyone's working and, you're still maintaining that office mentality. At home, you want to make sure, especially in this day and age, given COVID, everyone's working at home. You want to make sure that you're not wasting a lot of time doing things that aren't relevant to your job, right? And you want to make sure that, sure, if you have half an hour, you want to spend 5 minutes doing something personal, that's fine. But, you get the point, right? Don't spend so long doing things that are irrelevant to your job that you end up losing hours on end. And that's going to distract you, actually. Then it's counterproductive. You're being proactive, right? Of course, be proactive, don't procrastinate, right? There's several reasons people end up procrastinating at the bottom, but you may not know where to start. Well, just ask your colleagues then, talk to your colleagues, talk to your boss, make sure you get clear direction, right? You may not like the task, but you might just think, hey, the boss is going to forget, and ask someone else to do the job, right? Yeah, all of this is something you have to keep in mind, because in general, those are, those people who are the most proactive, I would argue, typically advance and get promoted over those that are not proactive. So being proactive is really important. Don't procrastinate. Remember, that's the complete opposite of being proactive, right? You want to make sure that you're getting things done quickly, getting things done early, asking for additional work if you can. Don't just sit there waiting for someone to give you work. And if you have work, don't just delay it, right? That's not a good sign. And again, in your early years, especially in the first 2-3 years of your career, you want to try to, make the best possible impressions. You want to try to advance. You want to try to, of course, create solid, positive impressions in the minds of your colleagues and your bosses, right? So everything you do should basically be to that goal, right? To that effect. Okay, avoiding procrastination. As we said, break the task into smaller components, right? Identify the most important and difficult parts of the task. Do those first. Teamwork especially, that's crucial on large projects. right? Discuss prioritization with your team. You set realistic deadlines, right? All of this is important. Now, in terms of, let's keep going here. In terms of communication technology expansion, right? We talked about not looking at your phone earlier and being aware of your social media presence and not posting things that are going to create a negative impression potentially down the road. But we do have a couple slides here on communication because this is important, right? There's these days, a huge correlation between increased levels of distraction and decreased productivity, right? Meaning, the more technology people use and the more distracted they are, they become less productive. So what are some of the biggest distractions? Well, technology, right? Using social media, of course, Facebook, Snap, Pinterest, TikTok, Twitter, all of these types of social media distractions, especially on the job, you want to be careful because that can suck up hours of your time easily. Okay, and especially if you're at home, I would argue even more because no one's around you to monitor you. Now, how to control communication overload. Okay, so how to control communication overload? Well, how can you constantly avoid looking at your cell or your email? Well, just put the phone away, shut down Outlook. Check both at specified times throughout the day. Now, with Outlook, you may say, oh, that's not possible. I got to have my email out. And to a certain extent, I would agree and say, sure, you can't close Outlook for 2 hours. If an email comes through, you got to read it and respond, right? And of course, that's the job. But my point here is, you do want to still have some level of separation between the task you're working on and constantly looking at your phone and email. But if you're working on an important document, spend time, look at that document, work on it hard, right? Put the time in, and maybe look at your email every 10 minutes, right? It doesn't have to be every 10 seconds. Okay, so maybe it's every 10 minutes, maybe it's every 15 minutes, right? If you didn't get an email in literally 3 seconds, no one's going to fault you for that. But for sure, if you wait, someone sent you something, it's an hour later, you didn't respond and it's urgent, that's not good. But I would argue, if you're looking at it every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, hey, that's probably acceptable. Again, you have to know what you're working on and what the deadlines are and who's pinging you. But the point is, try to separate out the task you're working on with checking your phone and your email constantly, right? Otherwise, you're not going to get things done if you're constantly looking at your phone and email all the time. Okay. And again, at home, even worse, right? Because you're at home. So a friend might be texting you. You might be more likely to respond at home than in the office to a friend, right? So it's things like that you really want to keep in mind if you're at home. Guys, even during this training, to be honest, how many of you quickly glanced at your phone or spend time, even if it was 10 seconds, checking your Instagram account, your Twitter account, your TikTok account, right? Again, it's human nature. We get it. Everyone does it. But you do have to keep all of this in mind because it does impact productivity. Okay, now, one bullet I've seen here affect everyone literally is internet research, right? One small click, you see that here, the second bullet, right? One small click can lead to 5 more, which can lead to 20 more, which can lead to 100 more. And if you're not careful, all of a sudden, you just lost hours and hours of time. Another one I want to point out here at the bottom is the fact that you should only send emails to recipients who need to be on the email, right? Think about when you should reply versus reply all, very important. All right, organizing your day. Okay, organization is of course key to successful time management, right? Create detailed plans of what needs to get done and by when. Avoid multitasking if possible, right? Now, you might say, well, that's the job. And I would say, sure, to a certain extent, that is a job. But many people unnecessarily try multitasking, and that's actually counterproductive, right? So it's going to slow you down, and it's going to dilute your total energy that you have available for all of the tasks you're trying to get done, you're trying to accomplish. So if you have to multitask, you have to multitask. Hey, that's part of the job, agree. But if you can avoid it, right? If you're working on a management presentation, you're working on a SIM, a confidential information memorandum, and you have the next 2 hours to work on it, and there's not much else that's urgent, Well, I would say just put your head down and work on it for the next 2 hours, right? Don't say 20 minutes in, yeah, you know, I'm bored, or yeah, let me focus on this other thing, or let me respond to this email, or yeah, I'm just going to work on something else that, well, I don't need to get it done until 3 days from now, but I'm just going to work on it, you know, because I have 5 minutes in the middle, I want to take a break. Devote as much time as you can to specific tasks. And overall, you'll get a lot more done by the end of the day, right? As opposed to, you know, breaking up your time by working on multiple things, you know, in a short period of time. That's not helpful. Okay, and one example is, you know, checking your email and talking with a colleague. That's actually really common as well in terms of multitasking, right? Because then you're not giving either of them your full attention, right? You might not hear what someone's saying correctly. You might misread an email, right? So just things to keep in mind. All right, now, next page here. Make sure that you categorize tasks as urgent and important versus important. Be able to identify which is which. You see that here. Urgent and important tasks come first, then important tasks, right? And you can't ignore them because eventually they'll become urgent, but the urgent and important tasks come first. What's an example? Well, delivering a pitch to a client that will determine whether you win the business. That's obviously important. And of course, that's urgent, right? No point in delaying that. You got to get that right, because that will determine whether you win the business, right? So it's things like that you really want to keep in mind when you're, and if you're not sure, hey, this is what your team is for, right? Ask your VP, talk to your MD, ask your associate, right? Talk to people on your team about the urgency and the importance of various items. You're setting deadlines. Realistically, estimating deadlines is critical, right? Involve your team in the process. Don't just try to do it on your own, right? Involve your team. Right? If you're off by a small amount, that's one thing, but you know, severely over or underestimating how long a task or process will take can, of course, be a big problem, right? So you do want to keep in mind that realistically estimating deadlines, it's really important, right? Because again, if you're off by a small amount, no big deal, but you know, if you say it's going to take 1 day and it takes 5, obviously that's a problem because you're not meeting expectations. At the same time, if you know, you tell someone it's going to take 3 days and it takes you an hour, that's also not good, because you should have a good idea, at least some ballpark idea of how long something's going to take. Okay, now how do you come up with an accurate estimate? Well, it's a combination of professional judgment, right? The longer you've been doing it, hey, the better idea you'll have. Historical data, look historically, maybe you know, your team collectively has worked on 50 pitches in the last 3 years. Well, on average, how long have they all taken? If you know, maybe they've all taken on average 3 days, maybe 5 days. Well, that should give you some guidance. If you know the average pitch over the last 3 years has taken 3 days in your group, you're working on something and you know you think it's going to take 3 weeks. Well, that could be a problem, right? So that's what we mean by historical data. Statistical analysis, I think that's getting more technical. But again, if you have a large project, different components, I mean, start really tracking, you know, bit by bit, how long is part A going to take, part B, part C, maybe add it up, right? This is where you can get granular. Okay, now, next, setting deadlines, right? Have a plan B ready to present if unexpected roadblocks slow you down. In general, things always take longer than expected, right? The more time you give yourself, the more time the task will probably take. You don't want to give yourself too long, right? But assuming you're working really hard, just be realistic is what I would say. Just be realistic. Noise and distraction. Now, most employees think office environments are too distracting. Okay, so we might conclude that at-home work, right, on a regular basis could be more productive. But you might be forgetting that at-home noise will also come into play, right? So if you're working from home, you have to figure out your work situation with anyone else you're living with, right? Family member, or maybe a spouse, maybe a roommate. And you know, in this COVID-19 environment, finding quiet space, especially if you're in a small apartment in New York, let's say, that could be a challenge. So it's just things to keep in mind when you're working from home, right? You might say, oh, it's not distracting at all, I don't have other colleagues there. But again, what's your work situation? Now, if you're living alone, that's one thing. And sure, you might not have any other noise or distraction, but you know, if you are living with other people, you may have to coordinate with them as well. Now, how can you actually reduce noise? Well, some suggestions here. Okay, take a silence break. Notice we said silence, not music, right? So that's often more relaxing for the brain. Use earplugs and not headphones, because the kind of Bose headphones a lot of people have when they travel, right? Those actually they block out continuous drone sounds like airplane engines, all of that, right? If you put that on in the office, that doesn't actually block out conversation. I mean, they do that for a reason. On the plane, the engine is what you want to block out. But if the flight attendant has a very important announcement, of course they want everyone to hear, right? So that's why those headphones are designed to block out constant engine type noises. But if someone's speaking, it's not going to block that out as much. A little bit, but not totally, right? So I would argue earplugs are probably better in the office, for example. Okay, make sure that you don't have stop-by conversations. Again, quick, hey, how was your weekend? Or hey, did you watch the game last night? Right? Type of conversation can turn into 20 minutes of banter going back and forth. So just be cognizant of all of this. Also be aware of that, if you have other people around you, right, talking too loud, humming, tapping your fingers, all of this can be distracting. So try to avoid doing all of that. Now, issues with working remotely. Now, given the COVID situation, right, we've all had to adjust how we work from home. Okay, it has a whole different set of problems, right? Setting a strict schedule for yourself, if you're working at home, it's not easy, right? You have to separate work from personal time. Okay, now this might be the new norm. Again, we're still in the middle of everyone deciding, right? But meaning a lot of companies deciding. Some companies are going back to the office, partially, others are not, right? Some are thinking, hey, in a few months, we're going to be totally back. Again, every company is in a different spot right now. We don't know where we're going to be in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from now, right? This could be the new norm. It could be the partial new norm, right? If you're ending up working from the office a few days a week versus, every day versus, right, no days. So we're not sure at the moment, obviously, what the situation is going to be like, again, 3-6 months down the road here. But you do want to keep these types of working remotely, issues in mind if you are working at home. Now, how should you manage working at home? Well, you have to make sure you make time for breaks. Okay, you may have to, run errands, go shopping, go to the gym, walk around the block, things like this. But those things I would primarily leave for the end of the day. Right, in the middle of the day, I wouldn't do, you're not going to go shopping in the middle of the day, most likely, if you're in this industry, right? You're not going to be running too many errands unless it's something really quick that takes, 5 minutes. But what I would actually make time for even during the day is just a quick walk, right? You do need to get up, you need to get your body moving, like I said. Even if it's within your apartment, just get up, walk around a bit. I do that all the time. I could be teaching from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. one day. Doesn't mean I'm sitting in one spot from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., right? There's lunch, there's small breaks here and there we give, right? That's so everyone, including ourselves, of course, has a chance to get up, stretch, get a coffee, walk for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is. Every little bit adds up, as I was saying earlier, right? So just make sure that you make it a point to at least get up and stretch and walk for a few minutes, every hour or so, I would say. But of course, big things like, going shopping, going to the gym, I mean, you can save that for the end of your workday. And the other thing is create a physical barrier between your work and physical space. A lot of people don't do that, but it may not be possible as well. But if you have the option of setting up your office in a separate room, things like that, it's always a nice thing to do, right? Always helpful, because then you can separate out your office from your personal space, your living room, for example. But again, that's not, we realize, obviously not possible, especially in in apartments. If you're in a New York apartment, in a studio, in a 1-bedroom, we realize that that's obviously not always possible. But we're just saying, hey, if you have that option, great. If not, then do what you can. Try to create that barrier even within the same room. Somehow separate yourself from everything else going on if possible. Okay, now, next page here. Okay, avoid multitasking between work and home chores. That's something we mentioned before, but you do want to make sure that you're not multitasking between folding the laundry and working on a presentation back and forth, right? Sure, during breaks and all that, that's one thing, but don't constantly multitask. You wouldn't do it if you're in the office. Don't do it at home. Just because you're at home doesn't mean all of a sudden you're doing things very differently. You should still treat work the same way, if that makes sense. I mean, don't do anything personal that you wouldn't do in the office. Okay, bottom line is, right, just apply the same concepts you would in the office at home, right? Avoid multitasking, prioritize urgent and important items, but use your use your peak energy time to complete the most challenging tasks. Okay, so all of those things we discussed earlier in the office, you want to do it at home as well. Virtual meetings, this wouldn't be complete without a section on virtual meetings. So we have several slides on this, but now given we're in the era of virtual meetings, whether permanent or temporary, we do have to keep some things in mind. We don't know if it's going to be the new norm, but hey, there's a good chance that even if it's not totally 100% virtual from now on, it still might be partial, right? There's a good chance that your employer might require you to go back to the office certain days a week, but maybe not every day, right? Maybe not 5, 6, 7 days a week, maybe 2 or 3, right? And this requires a slightly different set of tactics to be effective, to be able to heighten your presence via Zoom sessions and virtual meetings. Right, so keep all of these tips in mind when you're on virtual meetings, right? Stare at the camera dot and not other faces, right? Actors have been doing this for decades, but again, we're not used to it, but that's something that you should get used to. Just stare at the little dot on the laptop, right? Not your colleagues' faces if you're on a Zoom session with video, right? If you're not on with video, well, that one wouldn't apply, but many of the others still would here. Use a louder than usual voice. Okay, we're used to this here internally at Pillars, right? Because we give presentations day in and day out. So we are used to speaking at a volume which is louder than what we use just day to day, talking to friends, relatives, all of that. Because we want to make sure everyone in our audience can clearly hear us. And especially in this situation with Zoom and GoToWebinar and these online virtual platforms, we want to make sure everyone can clearly hear us. So as I said before, we would speak slightly slower than average. We would, we speak a little bit louder than average. All of this is really important, especially in online sessions like this. Right, you're not physically together with people, so you have to make up for it with a more commanding voice. The other thing is frame yourself in the camera. Your head and shoulders should stand out, right? If you're too far back, you might look out of sight, not engaged, right? If you're too close, part of your head or shoulder might be cut off. You have to be careful about all of that as well. And make sure that you're mindful of what's in the background. That should be uncluttered, look professional. And the last bullet, very important, take a cue from the many live talk shows and news that are being shot from their homes. Okay, so just make sure that, every night, right, there's news anchors on, there's talk shows, right? Just see how they're doing it, right? A lot of them are operating from home virtually, right? Notice how, how they're speaking, notice their backgrounds, their positioning, all of that. Okay, the other thing is you have to have an extra level of awareness while on virtual meetings. Do not multitask. We keep stressing that, but especially in a virtual setting, do not multitask. You might think it's not a big deal, but other people in your group on the call will immediately realize you're distracted. Okay, and that's really important. You might accidentally cut someone off. You might, miss a question someone asks, right? Things like that. So you really want to pay attention, especially in a virtual setting. Try not to multitask if at all possible. Avoid random noises, okay, such as, eating food or, banging on your keyboard really hard, right? You want to make sure you're avoiding these types of things, right? Just make sure that if you have to make noise, you're muted. If you're eating anything quickly, right, just make sure you're muted, right? We at Pillars actually have taught classes over the last year, especially, because everything is now virtual. We've taught classes even for SEO, where participants are not always muted and they're not aware they're not muted, and all of a sudden they might make a noise, which is fine if it's a noise for a quick second and it doesn't distract anyone. That's one thing. But we've also had people make very inappropriate comments and things like this because they're not aware that they're not on mute, right? So we don't mean on purpose, but we're saying, hey, they might be talking to a friend, a relative, a roommate in the background and not realizing they're on mute. And of course, that's a disaster. We don't want that happening, right? So you have to be very cognizant of the fact that you are on a virtual platform, and if you're not on mute, people can hear you. So just something that's extremely important to keep in mind, and you have to be cognizant of that throughout the entire session. The other thing is make sure you're taking advantage of the bells and whistles these virtual platforms offer, right? Make sure that you're making use of the resources, basically. So things like, there's a chat window where you can comment, where you can share links. You have the ability to mute and unmute, the ability to chime in and speak up, which many of you have been, which is great, asking questions, right? The ability to potentially share your screen, right? If you're at, you're working on something with a few colleagues, you have the ability to share screens, share presenters, things like that. Hey, take advantage of all of those resources. Like the bottom line is make the most of your virtual meeting. Make sure that you're cognizant of hand movements. Okay, it can be very distracting if you're on camera. Okay, don't, if you're not on camera, of course, doesn't apply. But if you're on camera, don't just wave your hands a lot, move your head a lot. Just be cognizant of the fact that people are watching you through a very small, through a very small screen on their laptop, right? And if you're moving around too much, it can be very distracting. When you're using the mouse, go slow. Right? Make broad gestures with the mouse rather than quick movements. Okay, very important to keep in mind because otherwise it could be really distracting. Now, calendar, right? Just as we said before, you have to make sure that you're keeping your calendar organized. This is essential. It can literally break or make your productivity. And of course, you don't want to miss an important meeting or deadline, right? That's one thing. But even then, even day to day, it's important to have your tasks mapped out carefully, right? One thing I do personally before I go to bed every night is I check my calendar. I review my calendar to understand what's coming up the next day as well as in the week ahead, right? So I can plan my day and plan my weeks. Okay, now make sure you're putting in accurate appointment times, any other information needed, right, for a call, if you're scheduling calls. Okay, make sure that, all the calendar invites have the appropriate attendees on them. Make sure you're getting all the details correct is the bottom line, right? You're likely going to be setting up a lot of meetings. So getting all the details correct, things like date and time, who's invited, any materials you have to attach to the invite, make sure you triple check that information before sending it out. The last thing you want to do is make mistakes and end up having to resend the same invite out 2 or 3 times, right? That of course won't look good, right? So you want to make sure that you're attentive to detail when setting up calendar invites. And anything else, personal, like personal time, just holidays, medical appointments, they should be on your calendar as well. And just, this way you get a sense of, when you're out of the office and when you're not. And obviously anything major in terms of holidays and extended time off should obviously be approved with your boss, with your group and your boss. And be cognizant of the fact that you don't want to be taking a holiday in the middle of important deals and things like that. Of course, that's just part of the job. It goes without saying, if you're working on a very important deal right in the middle, you don't want to take off for a week, right? So it's things like that you want to also keep in mind when asking for time off, right? Think about when in general it's going to be slow on your, in your group. All of that, very important. So calendar for offsite meetings. You have to incorporate additional information here if you're sending out invites for offsite meetings. Like what? We mean if the meeting's not in a conference room on your floor. If you're getting together in Florida, right? So I had a one management presentation actually working on one deal that was in Florida. Well, obviously that requires a very different amount of logistics rather than if the meeting was just in New York and on our conference, in our conference room, right? Or even in another location in New York, right? If it's all the way in Florida, we're based in New York. Well, there's additional logistics have to take into account, right? You have to take into account the address. How long is it going to take to get there? Any flight information that's relevant, right? What about when you get there? What's the person and the phone number of the contact, right? You have to make sure that all of this information is in the calendar invite. So when people get down there, they know where to go, who to contact, right? What the phone number of the contact is. All of this information should be in the calendar invite, right? The more detailed, I would argue, the better. You can't put too much information in there. No one's gonna get mad because you put the contact info in there, right? Even if they already have it, great. But if you don't put it and they're missing it, that could be a disaster. So the more the better. But you don't want any problems the day of the meeting is the bottom line. Okay, evaluating your day. Okay, spending 5 minutes at the end of each day reviewing your task list will pay huge dividends over time. Right, you want to spend a few minutes at the end of each day. Right? I do this, like I said earlier, I spend time at the end of every day looking at my calendar. But in general, just also looking at your task list and just what you've accomplished that day, what you have yet to accomplish. Right, you want to spend time doing this. It's the same concept as spending 30 minutes at the end of the day checking a model, right? After you just spend 10 hours working on it, right? If you catch a couple of mistakes, I mean, I would argue that's a huge reward for a very small time commitment, right? It's the same concept here. The same concept. Just spend a few minutes at the end of the day, get organized, plan your day ahead, for the next day. This way, when you wake up the next day, you'll know exactly what's on your docket, right? You'll know what to do. Now, of course, yes, there's of course unpredictable items. Maybe a new deal will arise, a new pitch will arise, things like that. But at least in terms of what you have ongoing, you'll know what's up next and where you have to go the next day. So, all right, now living a healthy lifestyle. This is the last section here. Living a healthy lifestyle. This is a choice, right? To a certain extent, you might say, well, is it in investment banking in these financial fields? Well, to a certain extent, yes, it is a choice, right? This goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of even exercising and all of this, but we're not gonna, we're not here to tell you how it impacts your personal life, right? That you can figure out, right? Of course, but it definitely, we can say, will impact your work life, right? If you think about it, eating healthy, exercising, that's all gonna lead to more energy and strength, and therefore productivity, right? Which is the ultimate goal. You want to be as productive as possible at work. Not eating healthy, not exercising will mean you won't have the energy and strength to be as productive as you can, right? So that's something, just big picture, that you want to keep in mind. Okay. Now, most of this might be obvious here, right? Eating nutritious meals, right? You want to make sure you avoid foods with, with processed ingredients and things like this, right? Additives, right? But the reasons, again, because you want to be productive at work. And especially on a job, we see a lot of people, a lot of analysts, a lot of interns not adhering to this, right? Not adhering to this, ordering pizza every night and things like this. Just make sure you're, once in a while is fine, but 7 days a week, ordering pizza, ordering junk food, that's not helpful, right? Eating burgers and pizza and chips and all of this 6-7 days a week, not very helpful, right? Drink lots of water, right? On the job, a cup of coffee or two, not 10, but hey, a cup or two, they say the caffeine's helpful. But again, not overdoing it, right? But a cup or two, they say it's actually good for the mind. Lots of fruits, vegetables, less sodium, less sugar, right? Avoid junk food, sweet food, cookies, cakes, things like this, candy, right? Processed foods. Again, once in a while, anything is fine, right? It's that phrase, everything in moderation is okay, right? But again, on the job, because of the extreme work hours in finance, right? You're not working 40 hours a week for sure. At the very least, I would argue it's going to be, 60 and again, that's on the low end. The high end, it could be double that, frankly, right? 100, 120 hours on the high end. So you want to make sure, even more so than the average person or the average job, you're really focusing in on these things, because it's going to go a long way towards making sure you're productive and successful at work. Exercise regularly. And like we said before, we know it's not possible for you to take out an hour in the middle of the day and go to the gym every day. We get it, it's the job. But do what you can. Work out early morning at home for 20 minutes each morning, if time constrained, right? Maybe 10 minutes, whatever it takes. Drop to the floor, 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, right? Just buy some dumbbells at home. I've done that, right? Just do some, shoulder presses, do some curls, do some squats, right? Just whatever it takes. You don't need hours and hours to do all of this. Okay, just 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day, and that'll help. But it's much better than doing nothing, much better. Okay, during lunchtime or downtime, if you have some time, hey, hit the gym. You may not have time. If you do, hit the gym. If not, no worries. Just do some quick workouts at the office or at home, more likely if you have some time in the morning, or even at night. But at night, maybe you're tired after a long day of work. So that's why I would say if you can in the morning, that's always a good idea. Make sure that you focus in on sleep as well, right? Make sure that, again, like I said, it's not possible to always get 8-9 hours of sleep, but I would argue, even if you can aim for 6 or 7 in this industry, especially in banking, hey, you're doing great in terms of sleep. If you're averaging even 6.5 hours of night, 6 hours, 7 hours, something like this, that's going to go a long way towards making you productive. Right? Don't underestimate the power of a good night's rest is the point here. Again, we know you may not have much choice, but if you're working on a live deal till 3 in the morning every day, we get it. We've all been there. But the bottom line is do what you can. Okay, don't come home and spend an hour and a half watching TV if you don't have to. Stress. Okay, this is one of the biggest problems in the professional workforce, especially in the US, because hours in general are longer in the US, right? Just in general, relative to Europe and other places we've seen globally. In the US, hours are just generally longer, right? I mean, you can't personally change that. That's the nature of just the work, the overall work culture in the US, right? That's something you just have to acclimate to. But the point is, do what you can to reduce stress. Try relaxation techniques. When we say learn to say no, don't turn down work left and right. But if you do have a lot of projects, just be mindful of the fact that you can't do everything, right? You already are working on 5 live deals. Well, you may not be able to take the 6th one on. Talk to your staffer. Have an honest conversation about that. Okay, social contact. Okay, with COVID-19 right now, right, with social distancing, you may need to reach out electronically with friends and family, which is fine. But once things resume back to normal, of course, meeting up in person, there's really no substitute for that. Yeah, but even right now, I would argue, even if you can do a Zoom call with friends, with family, hey, that's always better than just a phone call, right? Because then you have that personal connection. You can see them, they can see you, and so forth. Okay, so now here, near the end here of this deck, your working is actually an important part of a healthy lifestyle, right? And what we mean by that is it doesn't just involve what you're doing for your profession, but also other activities, right? You're working on your gardening skills, you're working on, maybe your cooking abilities, right? Things like this. So it gives balance to your life, right? So overall, living a healthy lifestyle, it impacts all sectors of your life. And it's going to impact your ability to work, to play, to take care of yourself, as well as those you care about. And the bottom line here, the conclusion is that effective time management is crucial for maximizing job performance and living a fulfilling life, right? Every minute is precious, as it says here at the bottom, and therefore don't waste those minutes doing something that's not adding value to you personally or professionally. Okay, time management, very important. All right, guys, that concludes this presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Any questions at all?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Well, if anyone has any questions, as I mentioned earlier, feel free to reach out to me. Here's my email address again, amodi@pillarsofwallstreet.com. I want to thank everyone for attending here. Hopefully you guys got some value out of this. And what I would say is just, reach out to me if you have any questions, if you need anything from me. Otherwise, wish you all the best, of course. Hope to see you guys on future seminars. And again, reach out to me if you need anything. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Can I actually jump in and ask
Sure,
a quick question? So there's definitely lots of things you mentioned that I can implement. I was wondering if there are any specific applications or softwares or websites that augment or help to apply some of these principles you're talking about?
Well, in terms of like the calendar, for example, I would just do it all on Outlook. I wouldn't try to have multiple applications because that's just going to confuse you. If you have Outlook, which, you know, at most companies these days, they use Outlook to manage as a calendar, right? So I would just use Outlook as the software to use when managing your calendar. If you try to use multiple software tools, I would argue it's possible, but it could get more confusing. So I would just stick with Outlook when it comes to that. If you're talking about the calendar and the time management piece, if you're talking about, of course, is that what you're referring to? Because there's tons of topics here, but when it comes to time management and calendars and all of that, I would just kind of stick to Outlook because everyone's doing everything in Outlook anyway. So I wouldn't try to open up and use other software if everyone else is using Outlook, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yep.
That
Any
makes
other
sense.
questions here on any of the topics covered either in this seminar or the prior seminar?
Okay, I think we're good. I'll stop the recording now. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. Appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Thank you.